Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I am sorry that I am getting this out so late, but yesterday was a really busy day, so I'm just getting it out this morning. So yesterday we read about Saturday night, what it was like for Almanzo and his family. Today we're going to read what their Sundays was like. Do you remember what it was like when Laura was worrying about fidgeting and stuff on their Sundays, and how her paws, they weren't even allowed to play all day long? Let's see what happens with Almanzo. So this is the picture they showed. Again, a very simple picture. Oh, that looks pretty yummy. Do you like pancakes and milk? Okay. When Almanzo trudged into the kitchen the next morning with 2 brimming milk pails, Mother was making stacked pancakes because this was Sunday. The big blue platter on the stove's hearth was full of plump sausage cakes. Elijah Jane was cutting apple pies, and Alice was dishing up oatmeal as usual. But the little blue platter stood hot on the back of the stove, and 10 stacks of pancakes rose in tall towers on it. 10 pancakes cooked on the smoking griddle, and as fast as they were done, Mother added another cake to each stack and buttered it lavishly and covered it with maple sugar. Maple sugar instead of maple syrup like we use. Interesting. Butter and sugar melt together and soaked the fluffy pancakes and dripped all down the crisp edges. That was stacked pancakes. Almanzo liked them better than any other type of pancakes. Mother kept on frying them till the others had eaten their oatmeal. She would never make too many stacked pancakes. They all ate pile after pile of them. And Almanzo was still eating when Mother pushed back her chair and said, "Mercy on us! 8 o'clock, I must fly." Mother always flew. Her feet were pattering, her hands moved so fast you could hardly watch them. She never sat down in the daytime except at her spinning wheel or loom. And then her hands flew and her feet tapped. The spinning wheel was a blur and the loom was clattering thump, thump, clickety clack. But on Sunday morning, she made everybody else hurry too. Father curried, that means curried, and brushed the sleek brown driving horses till they shone. Almanzo dusted the sleigh, and Royal wiped the silver-mounted harness. They hitched up the horses, and then they went to the house to put on their Sunday clothes. Mother was in the pantry setting the top crust on Sunday's chicken pie. 3 fat hens were in that pie under the bubbling gravy. Mother spread the crust and crimped the edges, and gravy showed through the 2 pine trees she had cut at the top of the dough. 3 chickens in one, that is a lot of chicken. She put the pie in the heating stove's oven with the beans and the rye and Injun bread. Father filled the stove with hickory logs and closed the dampers, while Mother flew to lay out his clothes and dress herself. Poor people had to wear homespun on Sundays, and Royal and Almanzo wore full cloth. But Father and Mother and the girls were very fine in clothes that Mother had made of store-bought cloth woven by machines. She had made Father's suit of fine black broadcloth. The coat had a velvet collar, and his shirt was made of French calico. His stock was black silk, and on Sundays he did not wear boots. He wore shoes made of thin calfskin. Mother was dressed in brown merino with a white lace collar and white lace frills at her wrists under the big bell-shaped sleeves. She had knitted the lace of finest thread. It was like cobwebs. There were rows of brown velvet around her sleeves and down the front of her basque, that's the front, and she had made her bonnet of the same brown velvet with brown velvet strings tied under her chin. Back in those days, women wore hats most of the time. They were called bonnets. Almanzo was proud of his mother in her fine Sunday clothes. The girls were very fine too, but he didn't feel the same about them. Their hoop skirts were so big that Royal and Almanzo could hardly get into the sleigh. So, do you remember the dance at Grandma and Grandpa's? The aunts had wore hoop skirts, so that was so that the girls' waist would be squeezed tight, and then the hoop skirts would come out real far, and that was the fashion back then. They had to scrounge down and let those hoops bulge over their knees. And if they ever moved, Elijah Jane would cry out, "Be careful, clumsy!" And Alice would mourn, "Oh dear, my ribbons are mussed." But when they were all tucked under the buffalo robes with hot bricks at their feet, Father let the prancing horses go, and Almanzo forgot everything else. The sleigh went like the wind. The beautiful horses shone in the sun, and their necks were arched, and their heads were up, and their slender legs spurred the snowy roads. They seemed to be flying, their glossy long manes and tails blown back in the wind with the speed. Father sat straight and proud, holding the reins and letting the horses go as fast as they would. He never used a whip. His horses were gentle and perfectly trained. He only had to tighten or slacken the reins, and they obeyed him. His horses were the best horses in New York State, or maybe even the whole world. Malone was 5 miles away, but Father never started till 30 minutes before church time. That team would trot the whole 5 miles, and he would stable them and blanket them and be on the church steps when the bell rang. So, this is what the stables looked like. Let me see if I can show you that. Can you see? They had this place so the horses could be out of the cold weather, or maybe even the hot summer sun. And this is what a picture of kind of what their church looked like and how people went walking up to it. Can you see a little bit how they were dressed? The men and women both wore hats, and the women wore this thing, shawl. And here you can see how big around the bottom of their skirts were because of the hoop skirts. When Almanzo thought that it would be years and years before he could hold reins and drive horses like that, he could hardly bear it. In no time at all, Father was driving into the church sleds in Malone. The sheds were one long, low building, all around the 4 sides of the square. You drove into the square through a gate. Every man who belonged to the church paid rent for a shed, according to what he could afford or his means, and Father had the best one. It was so large that he drove it inside to unhitch, and there was a manger with feed boxes and space for hay and oats. Father let Almanzo put blankets on the horses, while Mother and the girls shook out their skirts and smoothed their ribbons. Then they all walked sedately or calmly into the church. Back in those days, and in many places now, people always wore their very best clothes to go to church. They tried to look their finest because that was in honor and respect for God. The first clang of the bell rang out when they were on the steps. After they were there was nothing to do but sit down till the sermon was over. It was 2 long hours. Almanzo's legs ached and his jaw wanted to yawn, but he dared not yawn or fidget. He must sit perfectly still and never take his eyes from the preacher's solemn face and waggling beard. It waggled because he was talking. Almanzo couldn't understand how Father knew that he wasn't looking at the preacher, if Father was looking at the preacher himself, but Father always did seem to know. At last it was over. In the sunshine outside the church, Almanzo felt better. Boys must not run or laugh or talk loudly on Sundays, but they could talk quietly, and Almanzo's cousin Frank was there. Frank's father was Uncle Wesley. He owned the potato starch mill and lived in town. He did not have a farm, so Frank was only a town boy, and he played with town boys. But this Sunday morning he was wearing a store-bought cap. It's another name for a hat. It was made of plaid, machine woven, and it had ear flaps that buttoned under his chin. Frank unbuttoned them to show Almanzo that they would turn up and button across the top of the hat. He said the cap came from New York City. His father had bought it in Mr. Case's store. Almanzo had never seen a cap like that. He wanted one. Royal said it was a silly cap. He said to Frank, "What's the sense of ear flaps that button over the top? Nobody has ears on the top of his head." So Almanzo knew that Royal wanted a cap like that too. "How much did it cost?" Almanzo asked. 50 cents, Frank said proudly. Back then that was a whole lot of money. Almanzo knew he could not have one. The caps that his mother made were snug and warm, and it would be foolish to waste money to buy a cap. 50 cents was a lot of money after all. "You just ought to see our horses," he said to Frank. "Huh, they're not your horses," Frank said. "They're your father's horses. You haven't got a horse or even a colt." "I'm going to have a colt," said Almanzo. "When?" Frank asked. Just then Elijah Jane called over his shoulder, "Come, Almanzo, Father's hitching up." He hurried away after Elijah Jane, but Frank called after him low, "You are not either going to have a colt." Almanzo got soberly into the sleigh. He wondered if he would ever be big enough to have anything that he wanted. When he was younger, Father sometimes let him hold the ends of the reins while Father drove. But he was not a baby now. He wanted to drive the horses himself. Father allowed him to brush and curry comb and rub down the gentle old work horses and to drive them in the harrow. It's when they're getting the fields ready to plant. But he could not even go into the stalls with the spirited driving horses or the colts. He hardly dared stroke their soft noses through the bars and scratch their little foreheads, or their foreheads under their forelocks. Forelocks would be like I'm wearing bangs. That would be kind of a horse's bangs. Father said, "You boys keep away from those colts. In 5 minutes you can teach them tricks that will take me months to gentle out of them." He felt better when he sat down to the good Sunday dinner. Mother sliced the hot rye and Injun bread on the breadboard by her plate. Father spoon cut deep into the chicken pie. He scooped out big pieces of thick crust and turned up their fluffy yellow undersides onto the plate. He poured gravy over them. He dipped up big pieces of tender chicken, dark meat and white meat sliding from the bones. Oh, she cooked it completely with the bones. He added a mound of baked beans and topped it with a quivering slice of fat pork. At the edge of the plate, he piled dark red beets. Oh, I love beets. He handed the plate to Almanzo. Silently, Almanzo ate it. Then he ate a piece of pumpkin pie, and he felt very full inside. But he still ate a piece of apple pie with cheese. After dinner, Elijah Jane and Alice did the dishes, but Father and Mother and Royal and Almanzo did nothing at all. The whole afternoon they sat in the drowsy, warm dining room. Mother read the Bible, and Elijah Jane read a book, and Father's head nodded till it woke him with a jerk. And then it began to nod again. Royal fingered the wooden chain that he could not whittle, and Alice looked for a long time out the window. But Amanzo just sat. He had to. He was not allowed to do anything else, for Sunday was not a day for working or playing. It was a day for going to church and for sitting still. Amanzo was glad when it was time to do chores. I think I would be too. And I think that even though I go to church on Sabbath, which is Saturday, I think that we can visit with people and we can enjoy time. We could go on a walk in nature. I think we could go swimming. But that's what they thought back then. So that's the end of this chapter, and I'll be posting this, and then tomorrow we will read the next chapter. So it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessing on you and on yours. In your house and out of your house, in the day and the night, whatever you do, keep dreaming. Keep a story in your heart.